Okay, happy week 4, right? Here we are, trying to stay cool. So I wanted to start by just getting your thoughts on the monk fruit homework. What were your thoughts in terms of um, comfort level, what you went through, questions? Anyone want to start?
Yeah, I'll give my experience. It's my first really kind of stab at writing a discussion guide, or even trying to take a stab at the quantitative portion. It was a learning experience, um, interesting, and I took a I took a lot away from it. So yeah.
Okay, good, good. Um, Anyone else? Comments? You guys did a great job. A lot of similarities in approaches, but there were a lot of nuances in each of your approaches as well. And I'll talk about that. But thoughts? Anybody have any other takeaways besides Sharon?
Yeah, I can share. So this was also my first time doing a discussion guide like this. And I actually found that the first time through, I realized a lot of my questions were kind of yes or no questions. So I found that I had to go back and elaborate and make them more open-ended and
Mhm.
not just have them be yes or no and prompt the people. I did qualitative, obviously, but prompt the participants in the study to provide more color behind answers to their questions other than just yes or no. So it was kind of tricky in the sense of making sure my questions were actually asked in a way that would provide fruitful, hopefully, insights.
Make sense? Others?
Yeah, I'll say kind of reiterate what they both said. And I already shared with you, Debbie, when we talked last week, but I think the biggest challenge for me was not having done qualitative before, just ingesting data from qualitative, which I shared with you, but not being like too leading with like my knowledge that I already had about monk fruit. I don't know across the board if other people really know about it, but I have a lot of experience with it. So I was trying to make sure that I wasn't um like giving off too much like insight or conclusions to the through the questions. And it was more challenging than I thought, I guess, because you naturally want to talk about things that you're knowledgeable about and share information with people. So that was, for me, that was challenging.
Yeah. It's hard when you moderate a group or have, IDIs to not say to someone, like if they say to you, "Oh, I love this," for you not to respond, "Oh my gosh, that's my favorite thing in the world. Have you ever done this?" Gotta just like say, "Oh, great. Why?" And you don't really share your point of view, even if you know a lot about the topic. Knowing a lot about the topic actually helps you ask even more questions because you kind of know what some of those nuances are and kind of the nooks and crannies of the conversation. Other people?
I had a question.
Yes.
Yeah, so I did the qualitative as well. And one of the things I really waffled on that you brought up in the feedback was to ask them like purchase intention after we got to the end. So like, would you make the purchase of this drink? And I really went back and forth on whether or not to ask directly. And I chose not to, but I want to hear, like I said, it was a back and forth decision. So I want to talk and see if you had guidance on that. So I chose not to ask directly, like, would you make this purchase of the monk fruit delight drink after we talked about it? Because I think that type of question might be better suited for quantitative. Because if we have just a small group of people and we're talking about this, the two responses I can imagine would come from the focus group would either, no, I wouldn't try this, I like the brand, that I just told you about. I like these other options that I already told you about and familiar with. I'm happy. I don't want to change. Or it would kind of just be like, yeah, sure. I'll try it for you. Like, yeah, since you're asking me directly to my face, would you try it? So I don't know how valuable those results would be if we asked the qualitative group, how likely are you to try it?
Well, so very good question. So asking a purchase intent or interest question in qualitative, remember, qualitative is not numeric, right?
Mhm.
It's about trying to understand the reason why they would or wouldn't purchase it. So you have a different objective when you ask the question. So if you do it in quantitative, you're going to say 30%, we had 30% of the people who would buy, 70% are not interested or whatever it happened to be. And we might get some reasons why they wouldn't or would, and we might have a list of reasons they would, or maybe we have an open end. If you ask in qualitative, typically what I would do is at the end, might say, well, is this interesting to you? Do you think that this is something that you might be interested in purchasing? Remember, you might only have 10 people. It's not going to be 8 out of 10 said they would buy it. It's not about the numbers. It's, oh yeah, I really like this. Okay, what did you like about it? What was interesting to you? Well, you know what? I like green better than the blue thing I'm doing now, or this tasted better, if you did a taste test or whatever it happens to be. And it will help you get some color commentary around it versus just a yes or no. I love doing it, especially to get barriers, right? Because it's very hard to get barriers in quantitative data. And in order to have a successful launch or to some of the most successful advertising is built off of barriers, overcoming the barriers that people have. And talking about, well, people say, well, it was too sweet, not too sweet, or that's a bad example, but you get my point, right? So it's really important to know the barriers to purchase and the things that hold people back from moving forward with your product or your idea and the words that are there. That's why I like to ask the question. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I thought about that too. And like, even with the barriers, the argument I made in my head was, okay, well, if it's an issue with the product, if they don't like the product, that would be something done in product testing and not necessarily the
That's right.
qualitative work I'm doing.
Mhm.
So yeah,
But-
I totally see your point. The different objective of why we're asking this.
Yes, we want to
Makes
try to
sense.
learn as much as possible because the whole idea of doing this and of the kind of the plan that we're kind of thinking about as we go along is that this is really about discovery, right? And
Mhm.
trying to really build insights and language and thinking because we need to build an ad, right? We're not going to actually build the ad. We're going to be doing the research around the ads, but we need to think about what would that insight be? What have I learned, right? And I always like to hear what people say because if you go back to the videos that you watched for last week, you don't know what you don't know, right?
Mhm.
And so the reasons I may think that someone doesn't want to buy it may be totally different than why someone says, well, I wouldn't do it because, I would never switch. Okay, that's too common. Or, the example of the Fiji water it doesn't fit in the cup holder. Or, I like this, but, I'm not really, I'll give you an example, a real live example. Okay. So, there's always interest from people. People say they have sensitive skin, right? And then there are a lot of marketers who believe that they should launch new products with sensitive skin because, hey, people have sensitive skin and maybe they need a new sensitive skin product, right? Well, here's the thing about sensitive skin. For anybody who has sensitive skin, you probably already have a product that works for you, right? So you may say, oh, yes, I am interested in buying something for sensitive skin. But at the end of the day, the reality is would you go, if I said, Riley, would you go buy product X instead of the product you're buying now? Well, no, there might be too much risk. I already have something that I like, right? So if I didn't ask you the question, I may not know that. Is that fair? Does that help?
Mhm.
I've seen that play out in real life when you don't ask the question, you launch the product and you say, oh, shoot, post-mortem, why was this not successful? People already have products with they already have products that work for their sensitive skin and are not willing to change. We probably should have asked them, would you ever switch to this? Well, it's interesting, but no, it's too much of a risk.
And
Or
and you would prefer to do that in a qualitative rather than a quantitative
do it in both places.
fashion.
Okay, you do it
Gotcha.
in both places because they serve different roles. Okay, so qualitative is about exploratory, getting your arms around the pieces that are kind of in people's heads, the why. What are their challenges? What kind of what makes them tick? Why do they use certain products? Where do they buy them? How do they use them? What roles do they fill in their lives? What are their unmet needs? Things like that. And that helps, you kind of, it frames everything up for you, right? And depending upon who you talk to and the kinds of questions you ask them, you can then set yourself up for some really nice quant where you can measure some of those things. Because probably coming out of the qualitative, you'll have some hypotheses, right? You'll probably come out and say, you know what? I'm not going to say it. Maybe there were 10 words you were going to say to describe your product. I'm not going to use those words anymore because they led people down the wrong path. Here's the way people describe them, and this is a more positive way or a more descriptive way to do it. And then you put it into quantitative and you could measure it, right? So that would be maybe a concept test, or it might be draft advertising language or something like that. And in that, you would ask actual purchase interest, and you would have enough people in your quantitative to actually have a stable read, right? Because in qualitative, you're going to have maybe 10, 12, 20, whatever, it depends on whatever you decide is the appropriate number. In quantitative, you might have 100 people per segment, 125 people. You'll do stat testing on it. You'll know whether there's real purchase interest. And in the purchase interest, you don't just ask purchase interest. Would you buy this in addition to what you buy now? Would you buy it instead of what you buy now? How much are you willing to pay? All those types of things, and we measure that quantitatively. But it's an excellent question.
Cool.
Did that help?
Thank you.
My long-winded
It
answer.
did. Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Any other comments or questions from people? Lori, go ahead. You're on mute.
All right.
There you are.
I did the call and I had them do a taste test because I was assuming that most people wouldn't have heard of this beverage or weren't familiar with monk fruit. But I'm just curious as to, because I haven't done a lot of research with like food products. So I'm just curious, like generally when you're doing some type of food product, do you recommend having them like taste tests or
Yeah.
not necessary?
Yeah, no, I think it makes sense. Some of you, so let me first say this, and then I'll answer your question, Lori. Everybody decided to do qualitative, okay? In this group, I've had, for this particular class, other times I've taught it, some people have chosen quant, some people have chosen qualitative. There is not a right or wrong answer. Either way can work. If someone had chosen quantitative, we would need a lot of open ends in there because we need to be able to answer the questions that are in the challenge, right? So I'm going to park that for right now. But since everybody's qualitative, I'm going to talk about the qualitative. Now, let me answer your question, Lori. So this could be done without a taste test. I mean, there are sometimes taste tests are done before we even get to the process of testing the words, like this is about kind of the creative, right? But in this particular case study that we're working on, and let me just step back. Sometimes the research and development group will have done a taste test, right? They may have lined up a bunch of samples, done not just taste tests of just, maybe they had 5 different monk fruits to fine tune the tasting, but they would have also maybe lined up competitors and things like that to understand where we would stack up. In this case, there was no information about that at all. in the background, right? So many of you assumed, and it's all right if you did a taste test, all right if you didn't. Many of you assumed I needed to do a taste test as part of this, right? And in the taste test, having worked on foods businesses as well for myself, taste tests are good things, right? Because what you want is you do want to make sure the words you are using to describe it match up with the reality of the takeaway. And so I think for a few people, you might have you might have I might have asked you to put your taste test before your ideas. Some of your words are kind of flip things around because you want to make sure it's all right to talk about what the words are, but then you got to talk about whether something tastes okay. And then you have to see if your words match the product, right? So, think about it as, okay, here are some words I have about monk fruit, right? It's delicious, 10 fruits and vitamins, blah, blah, blah. Okay. And you might read 3 different descriptions and the consumer say, well, I like this one. It's interesting. I like the 10 fruits and vitamins. I like monk fruit, blah, blah. Okay. So now try 4 different products. They try the products. They don't think monk fruit tastes as good as the competitors, but that's okay. Okay. We have them describe each one, maybe 3 words. I think, Laura, you had them do 3 words. A couple people did that, a few words about each. And then I would probably come back and say, okay, if we take the description you liked the best, those words, the creative, and you think about the monk fruit taste, do they match up? Right? Because they kind of have to work together. That's a long answer to you, Lori, as well. But in food products, you do want to have some sort of taste test, especially if you have the opportunity and it hasn't been done yet. And it's a new product. Others? Any other questions?
I was going to say something.
Yes.
You had mentioned for me that, because I guess in my intro, and I guess because of what I'm used to, you had suggested that I not let them know that someone from Monk Fruit Delight is listening, just because you didn't want them to sway or. So I guess I'm curious, I don't know why I wouldn't, I want them to know there are people on the call, or, because again, the way that I'm thinking is I'm doing an interview, there's
Yep.
going to be people listening. So why not let them know somebody's on the call with them?
It's totally good to let people know. I usually say some of my colleagues are listening in, my colleagues are in the back room, my colleagues are sitting next door, whatever it happens to be. But usually for any groups, one-on-ones, whatever it happens to be, usually don't reveal who the client is ahead of time or even at the beginning. And the reason is you want to be able to have a general discussion, because think about how important the context is. I made this comment for a number of people. Context is really important when you're having a discussion with someone, because if you get right into it, then you're wondering, well, I wonder what they do when they do X. Is this like a consistent behavior? Are they, really interested in health? Is it because they're budget conscious, or, do they have 5 kids? It's you kind of need the full story. So you have to start broad and work your way in. And oftentimes, if you tell people what the product is ahead of time, they'll start making references to, well, I have monk fruit in my candy bar, and I do this and I do that. And, oh, you know what? My brother-in-law works for Monk Fruit Delight. And you kind of have to, you want to keep it as clean as possible and as objective, because what you don't want is you don't want to blur the objectivity of the discussion, right? At all. I mean, think about it. If you do a quantitative survey, you are fed a question. Usually, if you do it online, you are usually fed 1 question at a time, typically, or maybe a few questions, right? And you may not get to the concept, or usually you'd be fed the concept on a totally separate page, right? When you get to the brand. It's much like that. You want to keep the objectivity going with this, because we want to be able to establish knowledge and context about the consumers and their behaviors, because to get the insights, we need to be able to connect the dots. And there might be something we learn about all of the people we talk about that's kind of similar or different. And when we connect that with their actual behaviors and what they think about monk fruit or whatever it happens to be, it will make sense and a light bulb will go off or we'll learn something new. Does that help?
That helps. I
Okay.
only say that, and maybe it's because for me personally, when I've done them, on the interviews, they actually let the person know, okay, Bank of America is on the call with us.
Okay.
Which, of course, I'm not doing product testing. I'm not doing that kind
Yep.
of work, so it makes sense. But it just opens them up to just basically, in some cases, for what I've listened to be brutally honest sometimes, because they know
Yep.
we are on the phone.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was
Yeah.
it.
No, when we get to the branded sections, of any type of qualitative, typically we will say, don't hold back, right? Talk about whatever you want to say, whether it's Bank of America or Dove soap or Heinz ketchup or, Head and Shoulders. You pick the product, Chevrolet, it doesn't make a difference. We always, when we get to talk about the product, we always, and we say at the beginning too, don't hold back. We want to hear every bad thing you have to say and every good thing. So, but it might just be, a preference thing. So,
Do you always reveal the sponsor? I'm just kind of curious. I
No.
mean,
No.
okay.
no, I have, it's interesting that you would ask that. So sometimes people don't know what company or what brand it's about, right? It may just look like it's a category investigation, right? I've done those where you go in and you're just trying to understand how you maybe you want to understand like something about shaving, right? A particular brand, right? But or whatever it happens to be, but you actually have a discussion about the category because it's more about attitudes towards brands and stuff. And we never in that case revealed what the brand was that we were there to talk about. Never. And it's good to sometimes just get exploratory. It's very much kind of like a habits and attitudes qualitative, really just to understand. And many times, many brands, when they're doing or getting ready for big advertising campaigns and they're trying to really understand, what's in people's heads. Maybe they've seen something in another piece of data or they found something in some trends data, something that sparks interest. They will go off and just do a qualitative exploratory with people, unbranded, just to understand. Does that help, Lynn?
Yeah. And I mean, I've seen it sometimes where they don't reveal, but they may ask about 3 or 4 leading brands in the same category.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And they may even ask you personification questions, if, Jeep was a person, who would they be? What their personality be, et cetera, et cetera. And they may ask about all of them and comparisons, or maybe not even that. It might be more general or, softer types of questions.
Then I've seen participants ask at the end, who was it for? And then you
Yeah.
don't reveal it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It depends on the objectives. And that's, really in this, if for everyone, as you read the challenge for this, it did speak to exploratory, right? It was really about trying to figure out what the next step would be in terms of advertising and trying to figure out what people's preferences would be. Any other questions, thoughts? Anything? I would just want to call out a couple of things I thought were interesting. I mean, you guys, like I said, you guys did a great job. A couple things that were a little bit different between a few of the approaches that people did. Some people were all in person, which was fine and great. Some people did a hybrid of some online versus in person. And some people went totally online. Online, sorry, I'm not speaking properly. And it was interesting to see how you broke out the different groups. I'm going to talk about the in-person versus the online. The person who did the total online was Justine. I hope you don't mind, Justine, that I mentioned that. But she went totally online. It was interesting because she did do a taste test, even doing it online, right? She did the IDI, so the one-on-ones online, and mailed people the product ahead of time, and they couldn't open, or a product or multiple products, and they, when she cues them, or whoever the moderator would cue them, okay, open A, drink it, open B, drink it, open C. So I thought that was interesting. Okay, so and it doesn't mean there's no preference online, in person. It's a personal preference in terms of how you want to your qualitative, if you have the chance to do it. Sometimes cost plays into it, geographic diversity, what you're looking for, what your objectives are. So I just want to put that out there just in case you think online is out for things like if you were doing a taste test, you can still do that. Also, just be careful of the number of people. If you're going to do a group, just think about, especially if you're going to do a taste test in a group, you don't want to have a lot of people. You know, you need to really kind of manage the discussion with people, and you need to have enough time. 90 minutes is probably fine. Even you could go up to 2 hours if you need to, but you might be better off with 3 to 4 people in the group. I'd be careful also about ages, putting some people had 18 to 55 together. I'd break it out into groups because attitudes and behaviors, even income levels, are very different between all of those age groups. So really try to break out your age groups a bit, because that'll just keep it a little bit neater in the discussion. Does that make sense? I also want to just call it a few other things. Let's see, Lynn, you did your taste test. Was interesting because after you did the taste test, you asked if people wanted to rethink the words, right? What they were thinking. I think that's what you've done. I thought that was very interesting because, again, that was a little bit what I was talking about earlier, is that, you know, there are words on a paper and you say, oh my gosh, this sounds amazing. Then you taste it, right? You're like, oh, this is better, worse, the same. So I think it's interesting to give people a chance to kind of revisit that. And Scott, I don't know, Scott, you can jump in. I know you're off camera, but he had a grid that he had people kind of plot after the taste test. He had competitors and had people plot the brands in different places on this quadrant, which I thought was a really interesting approach as well.
Yeah. Hey, so
Go ahead. Sorry.
So yeah, I tried to use 2 different axes, right, to see, is there anything differentiating between Monk Fruit Delight versus, say, what they perceived as competitor versus who they see maybe not as a competitor. So based on kind of the earlier conversation in terms of some of the ingredients, attributes, taste testing, like where would they place Monk Fruit Delight in comparison to other competitors? And then there was sort of this secondary exercise where we wanted to understand if monk fruit in itself was a delighter or was something that people just weren't interested in. So where do I emphasize the attributes associated with the positioning and the brand with that? So those two kind of work together.
Yep, that's very interesting and a little bit different. Thank you. Any other comments? Because I'm going to move on to just talk a little bit about the behavioral data. And then I wanted to just spend a few minutes on our research plan stuff. Anybody
I
else?
just have one last question as
Yeah.
it relates to the final project. So I didn't do a taste test, and it's funny because I actually didn't even think of doing a taste test in there. I don't know, to me, I felt like, oh, it's a super secret product.
Yeah.
But for something like a board game, would you, in a qualitative study, let's say in a focus group, would you have participants try and play the game?
You could have people play the game. It depends on what your objective is, right? Is your objective to, it wouldn't be to change. We talked about this a little bit last week. It's not to,
Right.
to change the components of the game, but if it's to hear to watch people play it so that you can get language you can use or ideas you can use for your advertising? Absolutely.
Thank you.
Did that help?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Thoughts? Okay, so let's just talk for a couple of minutes about behavioral data. And just zero party data, first party data, second party data, third party data. Thoughts? Was this something new for everyone? Are you guys familiar with it? Do you use some of that data in your current roles?
I actually had
For
never
me,
heard.
go ahead, Lynn, sorry.
I've actually never heard those terms before. We use pieces of them, but I've never heard them broken out that way. So it was a little tougher to wrap my mind around than some
Yeah.
of the other stuff we've talked about.
Yeah, I would imagine that Bank of America has a lot of proprietary data, right? It just depends on how you
Yep.
can actually use it. I think that's what it comes down to. But go ahead, Lori.
I was just gonna say, so the zero, whatever, what's it called? Zero party data? Is that
Yeah,
what we're calling it?
zeros first, second.
I mean, that seemed the most familiar, right? Because we're doing research, or I'm so heavily involved in research that I feel like information,
Mhm.
gathered through research, surveys and such would be considered that zero party data. But when you started talking about some of the other levels of data, I think that those tend to fall more into like the analytics realm. And so, I don't really manage any data that's more analytics focused. So
Yep.
that was a little more unfamiliar to me than say the zero party. But yeah.
Okay. Others? Any others? Jacqueline, you were nodding your head.
Yeah, I feel like I have experience with all of them. So we have zero party data through our customers, first party data through clients that come to the website, and we get the analytics that way through cookies and tags. And then we also, I don't work on the media team, but my media colleagues use data for I feel like second or sometimes third party data for targeting.
Yeah.
Based on partners.
Yeah, it is a very common way. If you can get all the pieces together, especially the second party data, you can definitely construct some very targeted advertising. Anybody else? Did it make sense?
I was just going to jump in and agree with Lori. Before I transitioned into market research, I did 2 years here at the bank in the quant analyst program, but I got to get into the weeds of all of the data that we have. And the bank definitely has it, but the analysts, I think, are the ones that hold the reins to that. And the research explains the why a lot of the times.
Yep.
But yeah, totally agree, Lori. Got to spend a lot of time with all those different kinds of data when I had access to all of it, but don't have a lot of view to it now.
Does it make
in the
sense?
same way?
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Does it make sense to everyone in terms of how it would fit in, and how you might be able to use it, for research or kind of analytics as well as a targeting program for your communication? Is everybody pretty comfortable with that? Because it's a great opportunity area as we think about, our final project. It is an opportunity, kind of a starting point potentially in terms of where we could even learn a lot about consumers. If we used our zero party and our first party data, we could really kind of mine that a bit to try to develop profiles of our target audiences. And then we could try to buy some second party data or get it somewhere, kind of match them up. And Mark was talking about that. And it's a good way to build profiles out. Go ahead, Lori.
Yeah, so where I get a little hung up is so with the first party data and the second party data, are we talking about like actually somehow Okay, so that whole reading about customer data platforms and taking like information from different data sets and combining them. And so are we talking about actually saying, so I know John Smith responded to my survey with this information, and so that's my zero party. And so then I also know John Smith has been on the website and been clicking on these pages. So that's my first party data, and they can connect these two so that they're, you know, the guy who goes to this page consistently
Mhm.
every day on the website is also the guy who says he likes to, you know, golfing. I don't know. I'm just
That's right, that's
right.
right, that's
So
right.
you can
Uh-huh.
link those two. And then second party data that you're purchasing from, say, let's say I'm purchasing it from like Facebook or Instagram, you know, and I can find out that, you know, this person has 10,000 followers, and I can also append that to the same record so that I know all of this very specific stuff about a specific person versus something like the third party data. When I think of third party data, the thing that comes to my mind is we use what we call IXI assets, and it basically provides you an estimate of what someone's assets are, but it's really just based on zip codes. And so, like, you know, you could have a person next door to you that, you know, has $10 million, and the person living on the other side of the street might only have $30,000, but it
Mhm.
will estimate based on the zip code. So that one won't give me specific data for John Smith. It will give me data that is sort of the average for people who live in that area and fit the profile of John Smith. Is that
That's what
fair?
second party, think about that for second party data. Okay, because for second party data, Facebook and Instagram cannot turn over the data. I mean, that's a big no-no, right? So, but if you come out of your zero and first party data and you can develop a profile or maybe multiple personas of, you know, these are the 5 consumers or these are different people who buy my product or shop my site or whatever it happens to be, then companies that sell second party data will tell you, oh, people who have that profile also buy the New York Times, shop in, I don't know, Kroger, you know, do this, shop in Target, drive a Jeep, and do all these other things.
Okay, so you're saying
Watch
it's
these
not at the
media channels.
individual. It's not at the individual level, second party.
Not necessarily. It can be, but it isn't always.
Okay. Okay, because that I think in the video with Mark, is that his name, Mark?
Yeah, no,
I,
yeah, he did say that secondary is individual. The only one that wasn't was third party.
Yeah,
third.
I guess
Okay.
sometimes I always think of second party though as sometimes it's aggregated, but third party is definitely aggregated. But second party, it can, but you have to opt in and you have to know that people are going to sell your data.
What, for third party?
Second party.
Oh,
People just can't sell your data.
So they can
mhm.
know, they can collect that I went someplace, but I have to check off that, oh yeah, you can use me personally
That's right.
here.
Yeah.
So
You can't, they're not, because if you think about, let's go back to like the security part of it. I mean, for all of us who have access to personal and private data, we can't even send emails to people unless they opt in to say that we can contact them, right? People have to opt in, otherwise we violated our relationships with people.
Mhm. So then
I
can you give me an example of third party?
So a
Better
third
example?
party data would be something, so there are companies like, they're like, Mark talked about like Experian, but there are others, where they basically will link the data with, maybe market level data, like people's shopping habits, but it's not individual shopping habits, right? Things like that. When I
So
think
like,
of,
for example, people who play board games within this genre, we'll say, are likely to shop at Walmart and wherever,
right, and
something
it's
like
more
that. Okay.
aggregated. It's not going to be individual level, but when you think about second party data, when I think about second party data, I think about, okay, so in the consumer products world, you know, a lot of our data, a lot of point of sale stuff gets measured by like Nielsen, right? And they have a panel. and the panelists have names, right? And the panelists, you can see their shopping behavior. Now, I can't see their shopping. If I worked at Unilever, right, I'd have zero-party data and first-party data. I'd be interested in taking my data and linking it up with some purchasing data, right? Or consumer data that someone's willing to sell. You get a third party, they link it up for you. And it's a way, it kind of extends your reach and it gives you more learning, but you get someone else to do it for you. Does that help? And then third party is totally aggregated. And the thing is, when you have the individual data, you remember it, sometimes it's even just a small set, because as you, excuse me, you can match it up. So you might have 10,000 people that you have for zero party, and then you get some stuff in the first party. When you get to second party, maybe you can't get stuff to match up with all 10,000. So maybe you can then extend your learning for like 1,000 of them. And that's when you start creating like mirror images of people, kind of these macro views. And then you might go out and get some third-party data, because you want to create these macro views. And then that's kind of like, you know, you start getting served ads, right? And it's not, maybe it is because you clicked on something, but or maybe it's just because you fit the profile, right? And some company is going to just serve you ads because you live in Boston, right? At particular zip code, or, you know, you stop and stop, you shop and stop and shop. And that just happens to be the region where you happen to be. Does that help?
Okay, all I know is that today I was on Amazon and something from monk fruit came up on my feed on Amazon, and I got really freaked out. So I'll end
Isn't
it
it
there.
really weird? It is really weird. It is. And my advice on this is just think about that. You've got your data that you own, right? And the goal is to try to extend it as much as you possibly can. And it's hard to extend it because you've got to find partners to help you do that, right? So some partners at the individual level might help you in second party, and in third party, you get more aggregated data. But the idea is that it helps us learn more about our target, because the more we know about our target and the people we're selling to, the more we can customize ads, individualize our products, all those kinds of things. Does that make sense?
Now,
Yep.
I had a separate question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Similar, and it relates to the IXI that Lori just mentioned, which is the estimated assets, with
Yep.
the caveat that, like, I know we cannot target people based on investable assets, like we cannot target market based on that. Got it. But I did some research about 1.5 years ago when we got the new updated model for IXI, and we were validating it against the survey that I manage, self-reported investable asset levels, to see how much of that matched, right? And there was less than 50% agreement within 1 or 2 classes of IXI, where people said, yes, I have this much in investable assets, and then it's also estimated that I have this much, which is what we use as our internal segmentation. So I'm curious, when you have that ability to link up zero-party data to second-party data or first-party data, and there is a discrepancy that large, assuming it's something that we could target based on, where would you lean in terms of like what is more true? Do we trust the
that's
people to
such
tell
a
us
tough
that, or do
question,
we?
Riley.
Well, Riley, I would lean towards against IXI because we know it's notoriously inaccurate, and consumer perceptions typically align the best that we could do. It's sort of like if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, is a duck type of thing. But
Yeah.
And we had the same challenges because we all work at the bank, but we always do these segmentations. And there's a lot of times, I mean, they've been sunsetted. We have a segmentation like every 3 months, but we did this like segmentation, and what we said they were did not match what the consumers said they were. And I wanted to do research to kind of align this to see how it was, but my source of truth would be where the consumer perception is, because that's how they feel and that's the behavior we're trying to influence versus what some sort of algorithm might push out there.
Thanks, Steve. It's tough because sometimes, data isn't even gathered in the same way, right? And it is very tricky. And kind of getting all these different pieces to match, is tough. And there are aggregators, companies who are separate from, the stuff you're talking about. But there are companies out there who like do matching, to do the matching of second party when you have individual names. Or, you get more macro views, you could do third party. But it's a very rich area, but there are a lot of pitfalls, and we just have to be careful and try to use it.
They
in the best
define,
pos-
they can define things differently too. I'm just thinking about
Yes.
assets. It's all assets, it's investable assets, it's, and because
Mhm.
we have to be very careful when we do surveys ourselves, how we make sure people understand what we're asking for.
Yes, very much so, especially when they come from different people and different definitions mean different things. I've seen that in many places where their questions have been asked in many ways. And then when you look at the answers, they just don't align, right? So thanks, Lynn. That makes sense. Any other thoughts, questions? Do you guys see? So if we just quickly look at what our assignment is for next week, then. Hang on, I'll just pop it up for a second. Okay, so our assignment for next week, come on, is to think about now our social strategy project, right? And to figure out where first, second, and third party would be beneficial for our project objectives. Okay, so in this particular case, you can write out a format you might want to consider. You can do it in any format you want. I just prefer not just one gigantic paragraph. I think, I would use zero party here. I'd use first party here, or zero and first here. Here's how I'd use second. I don't need to use third, right? And just think about that in terms of how you would use it. Does that make sense? Is everybody pretty clear on what to do? This one is, I think, more straightforward than the qualitative or quantitative from the monk fruit. I don't think
It's
it's gonna
funny that you say that, because I think the opposite. I think this one is less
do?
straightforward.
I said
Okay.
the same thing, Lori. This one to me is more confusing since I don't work
Okay.
with this kind of stuff.
Okay, but here's a way to think about this. And if you have any questions, let me know. If you just even want to bounce ideas off me, a few people did that last week. It's not a problem at all. Just drop me an email. Just think about this, is if I want to just see, understand more about who my target could be, I could mine, just like we did in the first assignment, right? I could mine zero party data and first party data and try to develop a profile of who buys the most of XYZ, or who has certain attributes, or who spends the most, or who's most engaged, and start to develop a profile for my target. Does that make sense? Also, it might help me think about where people purchase. Like, let's just say that I go out and I buy some second party data. Like I was saying, you can buy, in the case of personal care products, you buy like Nielsen data. They have names, and you can append those names in a blind way. You can't see them, but you have a party in between who does it for you. And then, okay, Lynn, she said that she lives here. She's got 3 kids. This is what she does. She plays a lot of games. She loves strategy games. And she buys 5 a year. She spends 10 hours a week. And I know that she shops in Target because I've seen all of her shopping data now because it's been appended, right? Something like that. So an example of how you might use it. Also for advertising, right? If you know that in the third party data, you might be able to find out that if you had developed a profile of who your target audience is, then you might be able to say, okay, I'm going to be showing my ads. Most of the people that I want to target are on Instagram, or most of the people are on TikTok. Or I should be targeting in, gyms, having something in gyms because that's where people are all the time. Does that help? Or am I making it worse? Lori, did that help?
Yeah, I think I just need to kind of think about in my head a little bit more about sorting out the second and third party.
Yeah.
That's where I'm getting hung up a
Yeah.
little.
And think about
Me too.
put yourself in the consumer shoes, right? Think of yourself, forget that you're doing this for a moment. Think of yourselves as you are now the consumer, okay? And people target all of us all the time. How do you think that they do that? Right? You might have signed up for a coupon. I do this all the time. I sign up, I give people my phone number, because the company's like, oh, you get 15% off your first purchase. Okay, now I'm on their list. Okay, or you take a survey, or you get a sample, you sign up to get samples. That's, that's first party data. I mean, zero party data. Okay, there's all these different ways people get our information. And then they keep writing us emails and send us notes and products and drop ads and, and this is the same thing. It's no different. So put yourself in the consumer shoes and then it might help.
Yep. No, I get that, but
Yeah,
thank
and
you.
don't
Yeah,
get
it's
too,
just,
go ahead.
I was gonna say the reason why it's uncomfortable for me is it feels like it's moving out of the research space, and that's what I'm comfortable with, right? And it's more
Yep.
about sort of the I don't know, like even just like how marketing works. Like when I'm on Google and all of a sudden an ad comes up for something I was just, researching a couple of days ago, like I don't really understand like how that happens in the background. And I think that's where the discomfort comes from, is not
Yeah.
understanding. But if you said the data that you retrieve through surveys, I mean, that I totally get. Like that makes
Right,
complete sense to me. So
right.
it's just
Yeah.
more about getting my head around more of some of that stuff that I'm not as familiar with. So
And yeah, realizing that nothing is really private.
thanks.
I mean, that is kind of the realization overall. Okay, so we're not going to get a chance to go through the learning plan stuff that I wanted to do, but I will do that next week because what I want to make sure is that we're really well set up to really kind of dive into that, because we've got, we're kind of putting our arms around each one of these different techniques or approaches, right? And ways to think about how to launch this and how to develop the advertising. We're not writing the advertising. We're not writing the creative brief. That's the good news, right? But being able to evaluate the advertising while it's in progress, knowing what to write, and then knowing what channels to put it in and how to evaluate it while it's in market. Does that help? Okay, so if anybody has any questions, I know that this whole day, I get myself all tangled up too on the second and third party data. And then I have to go back and think about like, okay, here's a second party example that I actually did. Here's, here's a way to do it. And here's how to do third party. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of things, the privacy things are really getting tighter and tighter, as you guys know. So it's really even harder to target, and explicit permission has to be given for so much stuff. So any other thoughts, comments? Okay. Well, thank you. Have a good week. If you have questions, let me know. I know it says 4 pages. I don't think it may not. I think you'll probably be able to do it in a couple pages or 1 page. Just, just stay focused on what you think will be best to help the launch. Okay, guys, thank you. Again, let me know if you have any questions. Okay, take care. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay,
Have
bye.
a good night. Bye.
Bye.